The night Nora Sinclair reported the son of the most dangerous man in New York for stealing medication from the hospital pharmacy, she had no idea she was signing her own termination notice. She had worked the overnight shift at Hargrove Memorial for 3 years. Night shifts suited her, quieter, fewer administrators walking the halls with clipboards and forced smiles. She could actually do her job, check vitals, adjust drip rates, sit with patients who couldn't sleep and hold their hands through the 3 a.m. fear that living in a hospital tends to produce. She was good at this, not just competent, good, the kind of nurse that other nurses called first when something was going wrong and the doctor was still 2 floors away. She had been refilling the medication cart near the pharmacy window when she saw him, Caleb Voss, 19 years old. Dark jacket, expensive sneakers, the kind of casual arrogance that only comes from never once being told no. He was leaning over the dispensary counter, not waiting for anyone to help him, just reaching across and taking what he wanted from the open drawer. 2 vials of fentanyl, pocketed clean, smooth, practiced. She almost didn't say anything. She felt that pull, the instinct to look away, to pretend she hadn't seen, because the last thing she needed at 11:15 on a Thursday night was a confrontation with a teenager who clearly didn't fear consequences. But then she thought about Mrs. Okafor in room 412, post-surgical, the reason those vials needed to be there in the first place. Put those back. He turned, looked at her the way people look at someone they've already decided doesn't matter. Excuse me, those belong to a patient. Nora kept her voice level. Calm was a professional skill she'd developed the same way surgeons develop steady hands, through repetition and controlled breathing and absolutely refusing to let the situation move faster than she allowed. You need to put them back, right now. He smiled. It was not a nice smile. Do you know who my father is? I know you're committing a felony, she said. That's what I know. She filed the report that same night. Pharmacy theft, patient endangerment. She documented everything, time, location, what she observed, the exact vials, the manner in which they were taken. She included the boy's name because she recognized him from the visitor's log. Caleb Voss, son of Reginald Voss. She didn't think much about the last name at the time. Voss was a common enough name. She found out it wasn't common at all when her supervisor called her into his office the following morning, before her shift had even properly started. Dr. Harmon was a man who had spent 20 years learning to say difficult things without quite saying them. He sat behind his desk and looked at his hands a lot. He told her the pharmacy incident had been reviewed at the administrative level. He told her the footage had been inconclusive. He told her he was sure she had seen something, but that these situations were complicated and that it was best to let the proper people handle it. She asked who the proper people were. He didn't answer that. What he did say, carefully, quietly, while still looking at his hands, was that given the current climate around staffing and budgetary decisions, her position was being re-evaluated. She had 2 weeks' notice, effective immediately, and she should feel free to use this time to explore other opportunities. She walked out of his office, went to the nurse's locker room, sat on the bench in front of her locker for a long time. She had student loans. She had a lease. She had a sister in college whose tuition she helped cover every semester because their mother worked 2 jobs and still came up short. She had been 3 years into this career, 3 years of night shifts and holiday rotations and skipped lunches and charted every vital correctly and never, not once, compromised on patient care. And a teenager in expensive sneakers had taken all of that from her in 40 seconds. She didn't cry. She wasn't sure what she felt. Something colder than anger. Something that had no name yet. She was almost to the exit when the man in the dark suit stepped in front of her. He was not large in an obvious way. Average height, careful posture, the kind of stillness that reads as controlled rather than relaxed. He had a small scar along his jaw and eyes that conducted a very thorough assessment of her in approximately 1 second. "Monsieur Sinclair," he said, "Mr. Voss would like a word." She looked at him, then past him at the black SUV idling at the curb outside the glass doors and the second man standing near the rear passenger door. "I don't know who Mr. Voss is," she said, "and I'm not getting in that car." Mr. Voss anticipated you might feel that way. He reached into his jacket and handed her a card. Cream-colored, thick stock, just a name and an address. He asks that you come to this address at 7 this evening. He says to tell you that you'll want to hear what he has to say. She took the card. She wasn't sure why. She told herself she wasn't going. She went. The address was in Tribeca, not the converted loft kind of Tribeca that showed up in real estate listings. The other kind. A building with no signage, a private elevator that required a key, and a lobby that contained more square footage than her entire apartment. The man from the hospital was waiting for her. He led her up without speaking. The office she was brought into occupied the entire top floor. She registered several things simultaneously. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson, a desk that must have weighed as much as her car, bookshelves that looked like someone actually used them, and behind the desk, a man who was not what she expected. Reginald Voss was perhaps 55. Silver-haired. No rings, no watch she could see. He wore a dark suit, well cut, but there was nothing flashy about him. He looked like someone who had stopped needing to prove anything a long time ago. He was standing when she came in. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Mrs. Sinclair, thank you for coming. I haven't agreed to anything," she said. She sat because her feet hurt, and she had been awake for over 20 hours, not because he invited her to. "No," he said. "You haven't. I appreciate that." He sat down, looked at her directly. She had been looked at a lot in the past 12 hours, by her supervisor, by the administrator who came to collect her badge, by the man in the dark suit, and none of them had looked at her quite this way, not assessing, not managing, seeing. "Tell me what happened," he said. "In your own words, from the beginning." She almost laughed. "You know what happened. I know what was reported to me. I want to hear it from you." She studied him for a moment. Then, because she was tired and had very little left to lose, she told him exactly what she had seen, exactly what she had said, exactly what Caleb had done afterward, and what the hospital had done afterward. She did not soften it. She did not add editorial. She laid it out the same way she documented patient charts. Precise, sequential, complete. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You knew who his father was when you filed that report." "I knew his name. I didn't know what it meant. And if you had known..." She met his eyes. "I would have filed the same report." Something shifted in his expression. Not softened exactly. More like something confirmed. "My son," he said, "has been allowed to move through his life without consequence. That is my failure. Not his school's failure, not his mother's, not the failure of every administrator who looked the other way because of my name. Mine." He said it without performance. The flatness of a man stating a fact he had already reckoned with. "You were the first person in 3 years to hold a line with him, and the hospital fired you for it within 12 hours. She didn't say anything. "I would like to offer you your position back," he said. "Better than back, Chief Nursing Officer. Dr. Harmon will be transitioning out of his role. The board has already been informed." She stared at him. "That's not..." She stopped. Started again. "You can't just move people around like that." "I can," he said, simply. "I have significant involvement in this hospital's funding structure. I've had it for 11 years and never once used it to interfere. I intend to use it once now, to correct something that was done wrong." He paused. "The choice is yours. I'm not asking you to owe me anything. I'm asking you to consider taking back what was taken from you. And Caleb." The name landed in the room. Voss was quiet for a moment. "Caleb will be entering a residential program in Vermont next week. Long-term. Medically supervised. This has been in process for several months." Tonight clarified the timing. He held her gaze. "He has a problem. I've been enabling it by protecting him from outcomes. That stops now." She sat with that. She thought about Mrs. Okafor, who had been in pain last night because 2 vials had gone missing, and the overnight pharmacist had to spend 90 minutes on emergency authorization. She thought about the 3 night shift nurses who had texted her after the news spread, all saying variations of "I can't believe they did this," and "this is so wrong," but none of whom had said anything to administration. She did not blame them. She understood the calculus. She thought about her sister's tuition. She thought, too. too, about the way Reginald Voss had asked her to tell it from the beginning, like someone who actually wanted to know the truth. "I have conditions," she said. Something that was almost a smile moved across his face. "I expected you might." Mrs. Okafor in 412 gets a full cost review on her care, every copay, every out-of-pocket, whatever the system charged her that she shouldn't have absorbed. The night pharmacy gets a security upgrade, biometric access, not a card swipe. I'll have someone on that tomorrow, and I want it in writing that the CNO position is merit-based going forward. If I'm not performing, I'm not keeping it. No special protection because you put me there. He looked at her. You're asking me to make it easier to fire you. I'm asking you to make it a real job. He nodded slowly. Done. He leaned forward, placed a pen on the desk between them. Monsieur Sinclair, I want to ask you something, and you're free to tell me. It's none of my business. Why nursing? You have the mind of a physician, possibly a better one. Why not the full degree? She was quiet for a moment. It was not a question people usually asked. Most people, when they learned she was a nurse, either nodded politely or asked why she hadn't become a doctor, with a faint note of disappointment that she had learned over time to simply stop hearing. My mother got sick when I was 17, she said. Not catastrophically. A chronic condition, manageable but scary at the time. The doctor we saw was fine. Technically fine, but the nurses were the ones who sat with her, who explained what the numbers meant in language she could actually understand, who called me back when I left anxious voicemails. She paused. I wanted to be that, specifically that. Not the diagnosis, the after. Voss was quiet. Your mother, he said. Is she well? She's well, thank you. He nodded, looked at the window for a moment. My wife, he said, died in a hospital 12 years ago. A complication that was caught too late. He said it the same way he said everything. Flat, factual. The emotion held somewhere beneath the surface where it had apparently lived for a very long time. The nurse who was with her at the end, her name was Clara. She held her hand. She was the last person who did. He looked back at Nora. I funded this hospital in part because of Clara. I have never been able to find her to tell her that. The room was very quiet. Nora looked at this man who moved people off boards and made administrators disappear, and could apparently have a security system installed by tomorrow, and thought about Clara, whose last name he didn't know, who had held a dying woman's hand and probably gone home at the end of her shift and eaten something from the refrigerator and gone to sleep without knowing what she'd left behind. Clara did her job, Nora said. That's all any of us are trying to do. Voss looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said. I know. She took the position. She did not take it easily. She went home that night and sat at her kitchen table with the contract and her laptop and spent 4 hours cross-referencing the hospital's financial disclosures and board composition and the specific language around the CNO role. She called her sister, who was pre-law and not yet a lawyer but was extremely thorough, and read her the relevant clauses while her sister ate cereal on the other end of the line and asked sharp questions. Is this real? Her sister said. I think so. Are you scared? Nora thought about it. A little. Of doing it wrong. You won't, her sister said, with the absolute conviction of someone who had watched her from a very close distance for 22 years. She started the following Monday. It was not easy in the way that good things earned from difficult circumstances are rarely easy. There were physicians who resented her appointment. An administrator named Carver, who had been close with Harmon, and made his displeasure known through an elaborate architecture of small obstructions. Delayed memos, meetings scheduled at times she'd mentioned being unavailable, her supply requisitions held for secondary review. She documented all of it. She did not escalate immediately. She gathered data the way she gathered patient data, carefully, completely without emotion. She restructured the night pharmacy. She implemented a new incident reporting protocol that protected staff who came forward. She found 3 other instances in the past 2 years where pressure had been applied to suppress staff reports. She brought them to the board with a full written summary and a specific recommendation for each case. By the 3rd month, Carver had taken early retirement. She saw Reginald Voss occasionally. Not often. He came to the hospital for board meetings, and sometimes their paths crossed in the lobby or the elevator. He was always cordial, never familiar. He did not create situations that might suggest she owed him something. She found over time that she had started to watch for him. Not obviously. She noticed when he entered a room. She noticed when he was distracted, which was rare, and usually indicated something serious was happening in the parts of his life she had no access to. She noticed that he always acknowledged the nurses by name, every one of them. Night shift, day shift, the float pool staff who were at the hospital for a week and never came back. He knew their names. She told herself it was professional observation, the habit of reading people which nursing had made instinctive. She almost believed it. 4 months into the role, she was in the stairwell at 7:40 in the morning, taking 30 seconds of quiet before a department head meeting, when the door opened and Voss came in from the 4th-floor landing. They both stopped. "Monsieur Sinclair." "Mr. Voss." He looked like he hadn't slept. Not dramatically so, just the particular quality of someone who had been awake with a problem for too many hours and was too disciplined to let it show all the way. "Are you all right?" she said, before she'd decided to. He looked at her. "I should be asking you that. You're the one who looks like you've been up all night." A pause. "Caleb called," he said. "From Vermont. It was a hard night for him. Some nights are." He stopped. Started again. "He's doing the work. He's angry about it, but he's doing it. Good," she said, and she meant it. Voss studied her face for a moment, as if checking whether she meant it. "Yes," he said. "Good." They stood in the stairwell for a moment. A quiet that was not uncomfortable. "You're going to be late for your meeting," he said. "So are you. I have the advantage of owning the building." She almost smiled. "I'll keep that in mind." She went up the stairs. She did not look back. But she was smiling by the time she reached the 6th floor, and she was almost certain, from the sound of his footsteps pausing below before continuing down, that he was too. The incident in the parking structure happened in February. She had been working late, not unusually late, just past 8 on a Tuesday, finishing a staffing review that had been pushed twice already. The structure was mostly empty. She was 3 rows from her car when she heard the sound. Raised voices, then something breaking, then a specific quality of silence that she had learned, over years of emergency situations, meant something was wrong. She turned the corner and found 2 men she didn't know in a confrontation with a 3rd man she did, Torres, one of Voss's security staff. The men had him backed against a car. One of them had something in his hand that was not clearly a weapon, but was clearly intended to suggest one. She did not make a rational decision. She was already moving. "Hey." Her voice came out flat and loud and absolute, the voice she used for codes. "Back up now." All 3 men looked at her, including Torres, who appeared to be calculating whether her presence improved or worsened the situation. She pulled out her phone. "I've called security. They're on their way." She hadn't called anyone. The entire structure is on camera, and the footage goes directly to an off-site server. She didn't know if that was true. Whatever you think you're about to do, you need to think about whether it's worth what comes next. A long moment. The 2 men looked at each other. Then they walked away, fast enough to make it clear they weren't staying, slow enough to maintain the pretense of choice. Torres straightened, looked at her. "Mrs. Sinclair," he said, "are you all right? I was about to ask you that." "I'm fine." He was not entirely fine. There was blood at his temple, and he was holding his ribs in a way that suggested bruising at minimum. "Thank you," he said, and it sounded like someone who didn't say thank you easily. She drove him to the emergency entrance, waited while he was assessed. He had 2 cracked ribs and a concussion. He called it minor. She told him the medical definition of minor, and he conceded the point. Voss arrived at 11. She was in the waiting area when he came through the doors. He was in the same suit he'd been wearing for a board event earlier. She knew because Anita at the front desk had mentioned it. He looked at Torres through the glass, then at her. "He's going to be fine," she said. "I know. He texted me." Voss sat down in the chair beside her, not across from her, beside her. "He also told me what you did." I told 2 men their cameras were being watched. He said you didn't hesitate. She thought about it. There wasn't time to hesitate. There's always time to hesitate, Voss said. Some people just don't take it. She looked at him. In the fluorescent light of the hospital waiting room, without the desk and the view of the Hudson and the architecture of his authority, he looked like a man who was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Your wife, she said. Was it this hospital? He looked at her. No, one upstate. A pause. I transferred the funding here afterward. Didn't want the connection. And Clara, he said. Something moved in his face. I've thought about finding her over the years. But I've come to think that some things are better left as what they were. A moment that didn't need a sequel. She understood that. She thought she understood it better than he maybe expected her to. Caleb called me last week, she said. Did you know? Voss went very still. No, he wanted to apologize for what happened at the pharmacy, specifically. He said he'd been working through it in his sessions and he said he needed the person he'd actually wronged to hear it. She paused. He sounded different. Voss exhaled, a long, controlled breath. What did you say to him? I said I appreciated the call and that I hoped he was taking care of himself. She paused again. He cried a little. He tried not to. You can tell when someone's trying not to. Voss was quiet for a long time. He's going to be okay, Nora said. I don't say that easily. I've seen a lot of outcomes. I think he's going to be okay. Voss looked at her, and for the first time in 5 months, in all the elevator rides and lobby corridors and board meeting hallways, the control in his face went somewhere else entirely. Just briefly. Just enough. Monsieur Sinclair, he said. Nora. Her first name. The first time. I would like to take you to dinner, not as the head of this hospital's funding board. As a person who would like to take you to dinner. If that's something you would consider. She sat with that. She thought about all the reasons to say no, and there were legitimate ones. The complexity of the position, the optics, the power differential that would require both of them to be more careful than most people ever had to be about what they were walking into. She inventoried all of it the same way she inventoried a patient chart, complete, honest, nothing overlooked. Then she thought about a man who knew every nurse's name, who had funded a hospital because a woman named Clara had held his wife's hand, who had sat in a stairwell at 7:40 in the morning talking about his son with the particular rawness of someone who had stopped pretending things were fine. Yes, she said, I'd consider it. He looked at her for a moment. I'll pick you up on Saturday, he said. Is 8 too late? 8 is fine, she said. I'm a night shift person. I just work days now. The almost smile again. She had started to catalogue its variations. This one, she thought, was the real one. Outside the waiting room window, the city moved the way it always did, relentless, indifferent, enormous. But inside this small fluorescent square, in a hospital where the nurses knew what they were doing, and the night shift charts were clean, and somewhere upstate a boy was doing hard work and might in time become someone his father could look at without grief. Inside all of that, something had quietly and without announcement begun. She didn't know yet what to call it. She knew it was worth finding out.